Okay. Hello, my name is Abhayarathan, and the picture that you're seeing is the meditation hall at Bhavana Society in Western Virginia. And today is October 15th. It's about 8:30 in the morning, and I'm recording this talk as a follow-up to one that I did about 2 months ago, I believe. Anyhow, I'm a Theravada monk, and I originally ordained as a samanera here at Bhavana. And then since then, that was 15 years ago, I have lived and trained in the United States, Myanmar, Australia, and Sri Lanka, where I most recently lived. And during that 15 years, I've visited places and monasteries in both Canada and England. This talk is being offered in recognition of the I'll explain that the talk will comprise 4 major elements: the creation or offering of this facility, some folks have wanted to hear of my own path as a Buddhist monk, because I'm not exactly old by Canadian standards, but I'm certainly not young. And I'm just 2 or 3 months past my 72nd birthday. And as well, at the end, I'll try and talk a little bit about Buddhism in the West versus, particularly North America, versus perhaps what you may experience having been Sri Lankan or Westerner, or the situation is different again in England, for sure. Mostly it's appropriate to know 2 things. One, I'm not normally in the position, nor do I like giving talks. There's enough talks recorded already. And the suttas are mainly what I study, the early Buddhist sutta texts. And at my age, that's enough. I help people occasionally with questions about Westerners, mainly. First off, the people and events that are relevant to this day. As I pointed out, today is October 15th, 2021, and it's 21 months since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'd like to make a comment, having had to follow this myself, because I lived somewhat in isolation in Canada for about 16 or 18 of those months. And I've only returned here 3 months ago. And I believe that this is far from over. There's some serious stuff that is probably going to be played out. I don't mean to be alarmist, but I'll raise this later on when I talk about Buddhism. At this stage, I'd like to bring your attention to the people who were the instigators of this talk, who also were instrumental in offering to the Mahasangha the facility at Bhattacharya, which may, to many people, appear to be, it's just another Gillenhalla. But to us, it turned out to be a fairly significant resource. So first off is Mr. Kumar Punchiwa, who started talking about this back in 2015 for sure, and maybe even before that. And his deceased wife, Dhamma, who passed away on June 27, 2019. As well, their daughter, Gayani, and her husband, Priyanka, who are also involved in this. And they were the ones who together pursued this development of this Gimenhala and have now set it up into the Ven.Bhikkhu Gimenhala Trust. So, and there is a website, which I've never been to, but it will perhaps explain what is more appropriate for this. And on August 10th was the 5th anniversary of the Gimenhala's opening. It is also Kumar's 71st birthday. And I never did it at the time. I've told him, but my belated congratulations and happy birthday on your 71st birthday. Now, though the Gimenhala is currently closed because of COVID-19, and originally there was anticipation that it would open sometime in November this year, late October, November. And I was hoping myself to return to Sri Lanka this year, but I'm not that confident that things have settled down enough, and I'll delay my return. And but I'm confident that it will be as useful and as full when it reopens as the period, especially the latter 2 or 3 years of its use. It was quite useful. Most of what I'll relate is the story of how things happen, rather than get into exact Dhamma. But the Gimenhala started out as an idea that was, for example, it was word around Sri Lanka, and especially in Colombo and amongst the monks that travel, Sri Lankan monks that travel as well as foreign monks, that the government offices were going to be moving to Bhayarathan, and that was way beyond Borella, where we used to have to go for visas and passports and just, different government money, business. And as well, a lot of times the places around that Borella district, there were several Gimenhalas fairly close in, and they were accessible there, as well as, for example, Lanka Vipassana Meditation Center was there. So there was quite a few monks coming and going there, and to the big general hospital, the government hospital close by there, and some of the private hospitals in that general area. Asiri at Norris Canal Road, for example. I've been there a few times, and there was other ones further down, just a little bit south of there. But it was obvious that we always have had to spend a lot of time dealing with the government paperwork because of issues of proper process to make sure that you're known to be in the country correctly. You don't want to be breaking the law and stuff. Anyhow, there was going to be a movement from Borella out to Bhayarathan. We thought, oh, well, we'll deal with that. Well, someone came up with the idea, and Kumar and his family pursued it. And one day, they took a couple of monks. I know several from Australia. There was Bhante Nisarana, and from England there was Bhante Dhiravangso, and from a Sri Lankan monk whose family is from Panadura, Aranya Vihari. They visited, and then after they'd been there, got asked to go with Danish Metta Vihari, and I went to the site with Kumar, and it was interesting because we had to define what the purpose of the facility was and what we could use it for. And basically, it's not meant to be a home; it's meant to be a transit facility. People need a place to bunk, for, as we would say in Canada, for a night or two, plus, to have reasonable quiet, to be reasonably safe, and to be able to get fed. So it was decided that it would be for short-term occupation by individuals, and mainly for transit, coming in and out of the country, but also for the processing of government documents and sometimes for medical needs. That was the main purpose. And it would be maintained and cared for by the monks who occupied it. There were two issues. One was about the food, of course. And as we were driving back from the Gillenhall, Kumar had started talking about, Donna and people coming with Donna and everything. And Metta Vihari was sitting in the front seat. I'll remember it clearly. And we were on the main road going out towards the cemetery at Borella there. And Venerable Metta Vihari wanted to exit the vehicle somewhere before we got to where I was staying. And so he was quite blunt about it. He said, there won't be any Donna. We'll go Pindapat. And Kumar said, but you'll go hungry. And I don't think you can get Pindapat every day. And Metta Vihari said, then we'll go hungry. We'll find out what it's like. But I don't think that's going to happen. Well, as it turned out, Metta Vihari was right. And the other thing we also did was we didn't have any electronic devices there, nor is there any Wi-Fi hooked up and paid for. Kumar and his family who set the place up. We weren't against that. If people wanted to bring their own phones, if they had them and that sort of stuff, that was fine. But otherwise, it becomes a distraction, and there are enough distractions in the world today. And I think a lot of people in the past 2 or 3 years have discovered the incredible negative power that these devices can have on us. There's no question about it. And the place will be very simply furnished and kept. But a big part of it is, as we were all practicing monks, it's our tradition to care for the facilities that we occupy. And I think that was certainly the case up until when I left in mid-2018 from Sri Lanka. So when it finally opened, just before it opened, there was a ceremony of the official opening, and then someone had to stay there. Well, I happened to be going to Colombo because I was getting, in 2016, I was having trouble with my hands, and it was a surgeon in Colombo who had operated on one of my hands already, and I needed another surgery and on my other hand. And so it was scheduled for I believe it was the end of August. So I went down to Colombo. I'd been staying at Kudambigala out at the southeast part of Sri Lanka, south of Panama. And so I went into Colombo and was staying went to the Gillenhall. I believe it was in the afternoon. And I knew that the next day I'd have to go Pindapat. I was the only resident. It was pretty basic there. I mean, it was really luxury because we had warm water and no air conditioning, but it was nice surroundings. And I had survived most of the time when I'm in Sri Lanka. I go alms round in the villages and in the districts where I've lived. And I lived mostly in Burma as well, and been used to going Pindapat there. I've even gone Pindapat in southern England from Chithurst Monastery, for example. And so I'm pretty used to it. But I wasn't completely convinced that this was going to work, but let's give it a try. So it was about 6:45 in the morning, and I decided I'd robe up and put on my robe properly and took my bowl and in the sling and walked out the door, locked the door, thought, oh, well, here we go. See how far I have to go in order to see what I can get in my bowl. And I walked out and then down the staircase, which is open to the ear. And at the bottom of the staircase is the car park. So I got to the bottom of the stairs and turned right to face the gates, which are managed by an employee, a guard, who's there, who opens and closes the gates. It's not an automatic thing. I turned, looked out, and I know for sure there were 5, maybe 7 people standing there already waiting to put food in my bowl. And since that day, I have never experienced anything but that. Admittedly, they don't always line up at the gate, and we prefer to walk around the village and let them know that there's a monk in the area. And there have been occasions because of that, we've gotten to know people and they know us. And I can relate stories of different things that have happened. It's almost a part of the neighborhood around there is almost like a little bit of an old, more modern old village. It's not exactly as a village as you would find, say, at Kaltota or Wellapitiai or Samanala, different places that I've lived. But it is, an urban village, you could call it, the equivalent of an urban village. And they're quite warm and welcoming. I don't speak Sinhalese, and even some of the people there speak English. And so, there've been various events that I've witnessed. And right at the start of the village is a little triangular piece of property, and in there is a small shrine with a Buddha Rupa, and it suddenly was looking a little bit more cleaner. We sort of stepped up the game, I suppose, is what you would call it in the West. And I just felt like the area took on a different mode. It had a different feel about it for us. We had become part of it. Now, initially, the whole facility was not always occupied, but it came to be. Sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 weeks in between when people went there. Until then, there were periods when there'd be 2 or 3 monastics staying there, and it was the monks had to make sure they shared the food and everything else, and requisites that they got, and perhaps went further afield from the immediate area of the Gyllenhaal. I've been out right up to Bhattaramula Junction and walked down the roads and to the back lanes on different places, and I've never wanted for nourishment, sustenance there. And I've always had enough. If there have been 2 of us, or especially if there's 3 of us, 2 of us will go alms round and feed 3. And as well, we oftentimes have enough left over to give the guard, and sometimes even more, depending on circumstances of just the way the day is or whatever, to give the household cleaning staff of that particular condominium building where the Ginman Hall is located. The only difficulty I could say that relates to that whole area is, has it gotten busy. The whole road going into Barela from there, and the traffic through that zone has really ramped up a lot because of the government offices. So travel in and out of the district, it can be quite time consuming at times. And sure enough, if you get rain and an accident, boy, you're really hooped. But we managed to, organize ourselves, because once you get there, it's pretty quiet and peaceful and pretty secure. So how did I get to be involved in Bhattaramula? How did I get to be in Sri Lanka? I'm originally from Canada. I have British parents. And I was born and raised in Newfoundland, of all places, in Canada. I'm probably the only monk you've ever heard of from the island of Newfoundland and Labrador. The last place to join Canada, it joined Canada in 1949, and it joined just 3 months before I was born. So before that, it was a British occupied territory. It had been that way for 400 years. So I have both British and Canadian citizenship, which can be quite fortunate. And I went to school. I grew up there as a Christian, and I went to university in Newfoundland, and then in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and then subsequently worked mainly in northern British Columbia in Canada, where I was a forester, a professional forester, and I grew forests. I've often wondered why, until I became a monk, when it became evident, I wondered why I had been attracted to that. And I think, well, now I'm a forest monk. So I enjoy living in the forest. I enjoy that solitude, and I'm very comfortable living in a natural environment. It's especially so in Sri Lanka, which I'll get to, but I've trained, I ended up finishing work in Canada and was looking for a place just to go to live in a monastery, to have the experience. I'd had a very full and demanding professional life, not always pleasant. Forestry in Canada is a pretty rugged industry, especially when I was involved in it. And I was part of that. Everybody was involved in it. It's a lot more human friendly these days, I think. So I was looking to sort of like take a step back from that type of life, and I had looked at and tried to find a place to go for 3 or 4 months, because I'd stepped back from work and I had enough money to last for 2 or 3 years. And I ended up here at Bhavana. Bhante Ji said, yeah, sure, come for 3 or 4 months. Well, I ended up staying for 3.5 years and becoming a samanera. About 3 years into my life here, because I started out as a layman, then became an anagarika, and then became a novice. And halfway through the year 2006, there was a monk who came here from Burma. I met him, we talked. I found him to be able to, I could talk with him more directly and get his instructions more clearly, because the Burmese specialize in, their strength is their ability to teach people and help them understand meditation. So I asked Bhante Ji, and he gave me permission to go live with this master in Burma. And I went there and ended up spending, in total, almost 4 years in Burma. I left here in October 26th, actually, in 2006. And never came back until this year, even though I'd bumped into Bhante Ji and other monks from here over those years. But mainly as a result of that, I lived in Burma, and then I would go to Australia, because it's very tough to live in Burma. It's very, very poor country. And so the quality of food a lot of times and the conditions are really quite difficult compared to, especially compared to Sri Lanka. And I had the fortune to meet a monk in Burma, and he had come from Australia. And so I managed to get in and stay in Australia, in a monastery there, south of Perth, Australia. And it turned out to be complementary to what I was experiencing and learning in Burma. After that, I had a stronger feel to actually want to go and pursue this solitude in greater amount than I had up until that point. And my friend had moved to Sri Lanka just 2 or 3 years before that. So I met him, and in 2013, January 2013, I left Burma and ended up in Sri Lanka. And I lived there until mid-2018 and was quite happy living there. The only thing was, I was getting older, and the heat, especially in 2016, was pretty horrific. There was a lot of heat, there was a lot of drought, and there were a lot of dead animals. And there just wasn't enough, especially like the monkeys. You really noticed it when I was living there, the decrease in population of animals. But because of that, because of my age and different things that happen to you as you get old, you all know, if you're over the age of 60 or 65, your medical conditions, every once in a while something comes up, and it's best to go talk to someone professionally about it. Like, I was wondering, why am I changing my glasses? Are they not prescribing glasses properly? So I went to see this doctor in a hospital in Colombo, and he said, "No, you got cataracts." He says, I'll do cataract surgery on you. When would you like to do it? So, a good supporter of foreign monks said, I'll pay it. My daughter said, I'll pay part. So together they paid, and I had cataract surgery in Colombo. Both eyes done. 6 weeks later, I had new eyes. And then I had a condition with my hands that came up, and my daughter said, get it resolved, Dad. And I didn't want to use, she said not to use a public hospital, because that would bump someone. She had the money, she would pay for the surgery in Sri Lanka. And so I got that done. So those sorts of things were coming up, and my health sometimes would go down. So in used to take a break from the ruggedness of a place like Kudambigala, and I stayed for 3 or 4 months in both Wellapitiaya, which is east of Balangota, really nice agricultural area with extremely fresh, the best soup I've ever had in the world. No kidding, the best vegetable soup by far. I learned to appreciate black pepper there, that's for sure. Long pepper, and the kindness of the people. They really appreciated having a monk. Even though I couldn't speak Sinhalese, there were people in the village who could help me out, and I could help them out. That's what I felt. And I lived at west of Balangota, and high up in a place called Sammanalawata. That was tough. I was there for 3.5 months, and I bet you it rained for 3 months. But again, the people were just really, really supportive. My goodness, I could tell stories for a very long time over all of those places. But as well, to have as a monk, especially a forest monk, there's a small community usually associated with that geographic area of monks that you bump into, some of which go to the same place as you do to recite the Patimokkha, some of whom go to another place. But there's a certain amount of joie de vivre, you would call it, or camaraderie amongst forest monks, or even what you would call village or temple monks who live a more traditional lifestyle. And that's a great benefit of being a monk in Sri Lanka. And I could tell you stories till sunrise tomorrow on the feeling that you get when you're living in a hut in the jungle in Sri Lanka, or living in a cave in the jungle. And there are many cave monasteries, they're really well known. The ones northwest of Trincomalee, Lagala, just outside of Kandy. Then there's all sorts of smaller ones. There's parts of the great monastery Nauyena that have a lot of caves, and certainly all the kutis that are there scattered through the jungle. Then there's, on the East Coast, there's Kudambigala in south of Panama, which is a very ancient monastery going back to the year 160 before the current era. And that's getting pretty old. But these places are phenomenally primitive, yet the support of the population of Sri Lankans is such that even though it's tough, you get the feeling of being supported in that environment. You can come really close when you read a sutta. Sometimes you can relate to it firsthand. When you wake up in the morning, sometimes during the night usually, and you're lying there at night, and you get up and you might have a cup of tea or coffee, do a few exercises just to break loose the bones that have set in place over the night, and you might hear an elephant or something slither by the door. It could be a lizard, usually a lizard, but sometimes a crocodile, but not commonly. But lizards are common, elephants are common. You would have everything that is wildlife in Sri Lanka come and visit you at some stage or another. And you had to develop a level of contentment to know that in the main, maybe there was the odd one that wanted to eat you, but elephants didn't, and certainly the snakes didn't. There was never one that was big enough that wanted to eat me anyhow. So you really got an understanding of what these other beings, these other animals, they're in the animal realm, and you get to understand that. I got to see monkeys that really were, you could tell that they were quite mystified as to what was I? They were looking at me, and they would sit there just 2 or 3 meters, or I'd say 3 meters away from me. Sometimes, quite a small group of 10 or 12 of them with mothers and babies. And they especially those ones, the gray ones, I think they're called wanderloos. And sometimes they would just be coming out of the deep jungle south of there, and you would think, boy, they've never seen anything like me before. And I would just sort of like back off and look at them, and they'd look at me and drink water from the tank, and that would be it. And then they'd they'd go off and I could get a bath. Anyhow, that's what it was like. So when I went to Colombo, that's how I started. Whenever I needed these things to keep my health, so I could live in that environment, and that's what the Gimmenhalle provides for me. And as well, it was so convenient to be able to go there when needed. For example, my mother got really sick, and it was obvious she was 90, coming up for her 93rd birthday. And my sister said, I think this is going to be it. And I had just gotten to Colombo. It was the end of WASA 2017. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And my visa would have run out. So I just walked down the road one morning. The next morning, I walked down the road and told the people at the visa office at Batra Mula what was up. They said, fill out the paperwork and everything, which I did. And the guy gave me an exemption and wrote me a new visa for another year, which he didn't really have to do at that stage. He could have just said, no, you'd have to reapply or whatever. But they were kind enough and just did the whole thing. And 2 days later, I was on a plane out of there, went back to Canada. And sure enough, my mother passed away. I was able to attend, to her dying. I was standing there as she passed on. And a week later, got on a plane, flew back to Sri Lanka and went back and lived at Kudambigala again. It was really, very fortuitous. I've always feel I'm really quite lucky and fortunate to have stumbled into what I stumbled into. I wouldn't have said, no, I have to go to Sri Lanka. I don't think I ever set that in my mind. I always had wanted to go to Myanmar, Burma, and did so. But Sri Lanka came up, and it's been, I've been feeling quite blessed about it. I would like to take the opportunity very briefly to mention about something that, and I suspect a lot of you who might want to watch this are probably people in the West. And there's a few things that I feel really need to be said, because I'm living in a retreat center now. It's more of a retreat center than a monastery, because monks are in short supply in North America for many reasons. Just sending more monks is not going to be the answer. A monk who ordained here with Bhante Ji, was one of Bhante Ji's first ordinations here, is a Canadian monk. And he has his own monastery now. And he has said quite overtly and quite politely, that one of the greatest difficulties that Westerners have is understanding what dana is. And he has said he has probably given more talks on that subject than any other subject in order to try and help people understand what dana is. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity here to be the salesman once again. This may come up looking weird. There we go. The Word of the Buddha, an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon, edited and introduced by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It was produced in about 2005, and I still rely on this thing. His writing skill level has actually improved with time, I think. But a lot of times there's these issues about pin, merit, and dana. And the West, part of the difficulty is that the Western mind in the current era does not relate to giving, to generosity, to dana. Yet even in my own life as a Christian, a practicing Christian when I grew up in Newfoundland, and I have a friend who was a practicing Christian of the different faith in northern Alberta, a little bit younger than me. And we tell the same story that when we were children, it was normal for us to bring to school the new clothing that didn't fit or used clothing that didn't fit and had been cared for and re-sewn and patched up and everything, as well as food items, say canned food items or excess food items that the family might have, or food items that the family would donate just for the well-being of families that were not as fortunate as we were. That was very common. We did that every week that I was in school as a child in the 50s and the 60s. And that is now uncommon. That is not as common as it once was. If, apart from some churches, it just is not done. And so these texts here, I think, are really excellent at summarizing for the Western mind some of the issues that so often, and for Easterners as well, some of the things that come up like this. I like this verse from the Dhammapada, which explains what Buddhism is. It's called the Obada Patimokkha. It's translated as the daily advice to bhikkhus, but it's the daily advice to everybody. So this is a sort of like a freestyle translation that Bhante G did a long time ago. And it is, in the Dhammapada, you can read the supposed story that led to this being said. But the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, questions the Buddha about, Bhante, what is it that the Buddhas teach over time? And the very first things that come out are abstaining from all evil, doing what is good, cleansing one's mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. Now, a lot of Westerners find that really difficult. When they meditate, they're always a lot of people will say, that they're struggling with their meditation, or I'll ask them, do they get a sense of joy or contentment, and they don't. Many, many times it's because of a lack of the abstinence from evil. They don't follow the 5 precepts, for example, or they don't follow the 8 lifetime precepts, which are basically the 5 precepts plus a lot of speech, paying attention to speech, doing what is good, kindness, generosity. And a lot of what, if they were to study the suttas, they would find out, for example, in the Anguttara Nikaya, one of the favorite ones that we like to use is in the chapter of tens, the very first and second verses are about the role of virtue, virtuous behavior. What's the role of virtuous behavior? And the Buddha is asked by Ananda once again, what's the role of virtuous behavior? The role of virtuous behavior is so that the mind does not experience remorse or regret. Oh, okay, well, what's the purpose of lack of remorse or regret? Well, without remorse and regret, joy arises. And so many people in today's world have not put those pieces together. It's wisdom, but it's wisdom that you must see for yourself. You can read it, but when you've done it, when you've experienced it, and you've been in a situation of say you're living by yourself and all of it, like we live in the jungle and all of your neighbors are animals, you still have to be kind to those people. If you're going to start sort of like abusing everything that comes into your realm, you're going to be, at some stage, you're going to be in trouble because they're going to rebel back, right? So you get to soften your approach to the world. And a lot of people, especially in North America, there's a belief in the monks that I've met in North America that says the dominant emotion in North America is fear. In fact, I was told one time that the reason that they called the first monastery of the Ajahn Chah tradition is in California, and it's called Abhayagiri. And I was told that the abbot of that monastery at the time when it was founded said that that's why they chose the name, because fear is such a dominant emotion in North America. And it maybe that's why, Donna and Sila are not understood. People haven't got to that stage of getting through their fear, seeing their fear and getting through that so that they can do the third step, as it says here in this daily advice, cleansing one's mind. That's cleansing one's mind is what meditation is about, one of the tools. But what this says as well is that first verse is saying, and one of the monks here, it's a very Sri Lankan monk, and he says, practice is just not about sitting on the cushion. Buddhism is the practice. Everything you do today is part of your practice. And I remember hearing a talk by Bhante Ji about this. And he was saying the same thing. This was in 2007, 2009, after I left here. And I came up and just the way Bhante Ji was trying to express it. And I thought, all he's saying is Buddhism is a verb. It's not something you do like, you go to church and you're a Christian. A lot of Christians think that way. No, Buddhism is a verb. Buddhism has got this whole manner of being. It's how to live. That's what a lot of folks are missing. And you see it in North America now with this movement towards mindfulness as part of daily life, right? But it's taken out of context. And a recent study done, which was published in the spring here, April or May, I believe I read about it, 25% of people doing mindfulness meditation experience some degree of strong amount of discomfort, psychological harm, or feeling of trauma. And I think the only reason that they can experience that is because, one, they're not being properly taught, and two, part of proper teaching is this will bring up things that you're supposed to address. And if it's part of Buddhism, you don't grab onto these things, say, oh, poor me. Oh, it's done. It's what has happened. There is trauma. Join the club. Everybody at some time, there's lifetimes of it. The Buddha talks about it, being animals, the amount of blood we've shed, the amount of tears we've shed. It goes on and on. That's samsara. But when you take meditation out of that realm, of that context, people experience trauma and still not well understood. And what I'm saying is that there's a lack of understanding of the Noble Eightfold Path. People that talk about, they've been meditating someone told me they've been meditating for 10 years and they still couldn't repeat the Noble Eightfold Path. They didn't know what the Noble Eightfold Path was. I was absolutely shocked. Like, how could that happen? Completely taken out of context. It's something that I was not familiar with. Yes, I had meditated, but I'd heard about the Noble Eightfold Path. I'd been trying to read the suttas and everything else before I came here. So within North America, this is very, very much the way things are. And it's played out even now, and you can see it. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. This is samsara. You see it. The situation we have now with the COVID is simply exacerbating the whole of the weakness of a lack of virtuous behavior. Doesn't matter if you're Christian or if you follow the Islamic tradition or whatever tradition you follow. Virtuous behavior is the foundation of all of them. A lot of people will say, no, it's not, but yes, it is. And some people have been surprised. I remember seeing a presentation made by a woman of Jewish origin, who actually wrote a book about it, that she finally finished, took a couple of years of her life out of working and was investigating her heritage. And she wrote a book about that virtuous behavior was a basic foundation of Judaism. I'm not surprised, but she was like, the extent of what she had discovered was very profound for her. And I was so pleased for her. And with virtuous behavior, that's why, when I grew up as a kid, and my friend who grew up in Northern Alberta, we had this common thread amongst us, this virtuous behavior and this generosity. And where we diverge as Buddhists, people who follow the Dhamma is because we don't buy into this enduring sense of self or some essence that is enduring. That is, we buy into anatta. But apart from that, there's a lot of common ground you have with people. And I think that common ground is, to me, especially now, is very, very much eroded in North America. So I'm not altogether hopeful. We see how mankind goes, but that's samsara. And as well, Westerners don't have any sense of Buddhism to fall back on. So my message is that if you hear and see things that are really nasty, don't be surprised. I feel fortunate to have lived in a Buddhist country like Sri Lanka. Yeah, there's lots of problems. There's no question. I mean, it's samsara, right? Who's got a better government? I don't know. But the people in the villages that I lived there, they all had their own stuff going on, right? Life is difficult. And the more one tries to have virtue, to have generosity, and the joy you get sometimes by just holding your bowl and seeing some kid in the school. I had a guy in Wellapiti one day. I was walking towards the start of my alms round, and he was going to school to write one of his A-level exams. I know he spoke really good English, and we had a conversation. He gave me his lunch. This is 6:30, 6:45 in the morning, and he was going to write his exam. He was just so bubbly and just so joyful, and he put his lunch into my bowl. And it doesn't get much better than that. I've had many circumstances like that. In Kandy, one time I was staying at this small monastery, and I was told to go on this alms round. I had to go down the hill across the intersection. And so I went out the door, down the hill, across the intersection. I got the other intersection, and I was looking for traffic. And this guy whizzes up on his motorcycle, gets off his motorcycle, takes off his helmet, gets down on the ground and bows, pays respects, takes his lunch out of his backpack and puts it in my bowl. That does not happen in Vancouver. It doesn't happen anywhere in Canada that I've seen. I've walked through Vancouver for 20 days and got nothing. I've stood in Vancouver, got nothing. It happens in England. It happens, I'm told, by friends who've been on alms round in Ireland, it happens there. But it doesn't happen very much in North America. Now you can say, oh, I heard of so-and-so. Well, maybe in certain districts it happens. But it's that awareness of that tradition that goes with the monastic order, the Buddhist monastic order, perhaps. But you feel that becomes, as a monk, that becomes part of your daily life. That's a huge part of providing the opportunity for people to give and for being the recipient of that generosity. That when you sit down or you go back to your room, and I knew a good friend of mine from Vietnam, we'd go alms round together and get our bowls full of rice, and we'd have these canisters that we would carry the curries and stuff in. And we would always turn the food over to the kitchen staff to, share it up amongst the monks to be offered again. But he would always keep some of the rice in his bowl. And he told me one day through an interpreter, he said, when I open up that rice, I remember all those people that put rice in my bowl that morning. And in Burma, like they don't have very much at all. But to have that joy in your mind where you can sort of, give this back to them and then have it as part of your daily practice is really powerful for how humbling it is and how it works away at this thing called one's perception of I, me, and mine. That's what alms round helps us to do. And I'm sure it helps the lay people as well. So I'll leave you with that as a parting gesture, as a parting thought. And I would encourage you to there are these two books that Bhikkhu Bodhi has put together. The one I've shown you already, an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon, put out in 2005 by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And there's this more recent one, which is probably very succinct, and it has its own story, but it's another anthology, and it has to do with social and communal harmony. And I've thumbed through this every night now for about 2 weeks. I had a copy of this when it first came out, but I'm re-looking at it again because there's so much in there that is helpful for putting our present world circumstance into context. Real good, solid advice from the Buddha. At least I find it so. So I'd like to leave you with that and hope that you are well and you will stay safe. And thank you. Be well.